Commander Sarah Chen stood before the Galactic Council, her dress uniform unable to hide the fading bruises that painted her neck in shades of purple and yellow. The assembled representatives from 47 different species watched her with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed disgust. She had requested this emergency session, and now every eye in the vast chamber was fixed on her damaged form. The Zephyrian ambassador, his crystalline features catching the chamber's artificial light, spoke first. "Commander Chen, we appreciate your persistence in requesting this audience. However, we fail to see why the Council should concern itself with what appears to be a minor skirmish involving your species." Sarah's jaw tightened, but her voice remained steady. Minor skirmish? She touched the bruise at her throat, a perfect handprint left by claws that had tried to crush her windpipe. 3 human colonies, 40,000 civilians, men, women, children, all dead. A ripple of movement passed through the chamber. The Kanthari delegate, a creature resembling a massive praying mantis, clicked his mandibles dismissively. "The galaxy is vast, human. Death is common. Your species has been warned repeatedly about expanding into contested territories." "Contested by whom?" Sarah's voice echoed off the chamber walls. "The Draconis Empire claims no official territory in those sectors. They simply hunt there." The word hung in the air like a poison cloud. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably. The Draconis Empire had been a shadow over the galaxy for centuries, a collection of apex predator species that viewed other races as either prey or competition. They rarely engaged in formal warfare, preferring to strike isolated targets and disappear back into the dark spaces between stars. High Counselor Vexahai, an ancient being whose species had helped found the Galactic Council, leaned forward on his floating platform. "Commander, while we sympathize with your losses, the Council has limited authority over the Draconis Empire. They are not signatories to our treaties, because you're all too afraid to make them sign," Sarah said, her words cutting through diplomatic protocol like a blade through silk. The chamber erupted in outraged voices. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages, their translators struggling to keep up with the flood of indignation. Sarah stood motionless in the center of it all, letting their anger wash over her like rain. When the noise finally died down, High Counselor Vexhai's voice carried a note of warning. "Commander Chen, you forget yourself. This council has maintained peace between hundreds of species for over a millennium." "Peace?" Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "You call this peace? You've created a galaxy where might makes right, where predators hunt freely as long as they don't threaten your core worlds. You've turned the outer systems into hunting grounds, and when something like this happens, you shrug and call it the natural order." She began to walk slowly around the speaking circle, her boots clicking against the polished floor. Every step brought her closer to one delegation or another, and she could see them tense as she approached. "Let me tell you about the natural order," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "My people found the survivors of Kepler 442b 3 days after the attack. A little girl named Emma, 8 years old. She had hidden in a waste recycling unit for 76 hours while the Draconis picked through the ruins of her home. Do you know what she told me when we pulled her out?" The chamber had fallen silent again. Even the most hostile delegates seemed drawn into her narrative. She said the monsters told her they were going to save her for last, so she could watch what happened to everyone else. They wanted her to be afraid. They fed on her terror for 3 days before they got bored and left. Sarah stopped walking and turned to face the Kanthari delegate directly. "You want to talk about the natural order? In nature, predators kill for food, for territory, for survival. The Draconis kill for entertainment. They've turned genocide into a sport, and you've given them a galaxy-sized hunting preserve." The insectoid delegate's compound eyes glittered with what might have been anger or amusement. "And what would you have us do, human? Your species has been in space for barely 2 centuries. You lack the wisdom to understand the delicate balance we maintain." "Balance?" Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the chamber. "There is no balance. There's only fear. You're so terrified of the Draconis that you've convinced yourselves that appeasing them is wisdom. You've made peace with evil and called it civilization." High Counselor Vexhai raised one ancient hand. "Commander, your passion is unnoted, but what you describe has been the way of things for longer than your species has existed. The strong survive, the weak adapt or perish. This is universal law." Sarah reached into her uniform pocket and withdrew a small device. With a gesture, she activated it, and a holographic image appeared above the speaking circle. It showed a young human woman barely out of her teens holding a baby. "This was my daughter," Sarah said quietly. Lieutenant Jessica Chen, age 19. She was stationed on Kepler 442b as part of the Colonial Defense Force. The baby was her son, Michael. He was 6 months old. The hologram shifted, showing the same woman in military gear, her face set with determination as she stood before a group of other young soldiers. When the Draconis attacked, Jessie could have evacuated with the first wave. Her commander ordered her to take the baby and run, but she knew that every minute she could buy would save more lives. So she stayed. She and 37 other kids who should have been worrying about college and dating and what to do with their lives. The image changed again, showing the aftermath of the battle. Bodies in colonial defense uniforms scattered around a makeshift barricade. Sarah's daughter was visible among them, her arms still wrapped protectively around her infant son. They held for 14 hours against creatures that see warfare as entertainment. 14 hours with small arms and determination against monsters that have been perfecting the art of killing for millennia. And when it was over, when the Draconis finally broke through, do you know what they found? Sarah's voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. They found a message. Jessie had used her own blood to write it on the wall behind their position. 3 words. "We are coming." The chamber was dead silent now. Even the constant hum of the air recyclers seemed muted. "That's why I'm here," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger again. "Not to beg for your help, not to ask for your protection. I'm here to deliver a message from humanity to the galaxy. The same message my daughter left with her dying breath." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegate she could see. "We are coming." The emergency session had ended in chaos, with delegates arguing among themselves while Sarah was escorted from the chamber by council security. Now she sat in a sterile holding room, waiting for what she assumed would be a formal reprimand and expulsion from council space. Instead, the door chimed and admitted a figure she hadn't expected to see. Fleet Admiral Marcus Rivera looked older than his 60 years. His dark hair shot through with silver, and his face bearing the weight of command decisions that had shaped human expansion into the galaxy. He was Sarah's superior, but more than that, he was her friend. They had served together during the first contact protocols, when humanity had still believed the galaxy might welcome them with open arms. "That was quite a speech," Marcus said, settling into the chair across from her. "Half the council wants your head, and the other half is pretending they didn't hear anything." Sarah rubbed the bruise on her neck absently. "Good, let them be uncomfortable for once. Sarah, what you did in there, it changes things. There's no going back now." "Good," she repeated. "I'm tired of playing their games. I'm tired of watching our people die while the council talks about balance and natural order." Marcus leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The Draconis Empire has noticed our expansion. 3 dead colonies in 6 months isn't random hunting. It's a pattern. They're testing us. Testing us for what? To see if we'll break. To see if we'll run back to Earth with our tails between our legs and abandon the outer colonies." Marcus pulled out a data pad and slid it across the table. "Intelligence estimates they'll hit 2 more human settlements within the month. Probably New Vancouver and the agricultural station at Ross 128. Sarah picked up the pad and scanned the reports. Satellite imagery showed Draconis scout ships patrolling the edges of human space. Dark, angular vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "How many people?" "Combined? Nearly 100,000. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. She thought of her daughter's message written in blood on a ruined wall. "We are coming. What's our response?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his words were carefully measured. "Officially, we're recommending evacuation of all outer colony worlds. Pull back to the core systems where we can establish better defenses." And unofficially, a smile ghost across Marcus's weathered features. "Unofficially, I've been in communication with certain elements within Earth Command. People who think like you do. People who believe that running away isn't the human way." Sarah set down the datapad and studied her old friend's face. "Marcus, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that your speech to the council wasn't just heard by aliens. There were human representatives in that chamber, and they transmitted your words back to Earth in real time. Right now, every newsfeed from Sol to the Outer Rim is playing footage of you standing up to the galaxy's bullies. That wasn't my intention, wasn't it?" Marcus challenged. "Sarah, you're not stupid. You knew that challenging the council directly would make waves. You knew that calling out their cowardice would resonate with people back home who are sick of watching their children die in space. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. What's the reaction been? Mixed. The politicians are screaming about diplomatic incidents and the danger of making enemies. But the military— Marcus paused. The military is angry, Sarah, really angry. 3 dead colonies, and the best our government can offer is evacuation plans and stern diplomatic protests. That's because they still think we can find a place in this galactic community. They still believe that if we just prove ourselves worthy, the other species will accept us as equals. But you don't believe that anymore. No, Sarah said firmly. I don't. I've seen how this galaxy works. The strong take what they want and the weak smile and call it civilization. The council doesn't want partners, they want subjects. And the Draconis don't want territory, they want victims. Marcus nodded slowly. There's a group within Earth Command. Admirals, generals, intelligence officers. People who've been watching the situation develop and coming to the same conclusions you have. They call themselves the Terran Liberation Front. Liberation from what? From the illusion that we can find peace in a galaxy that sees us as either prey or potential slaves. Marcus leaned back in his chair. They want to meet with you, Sarah. They want to hear your ideas about how humanity should respond to the Draconis threat. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She was being offered a choice that would define not just her own future, but potentially the future of her entire species. What exactly are they proposing? A new doctrine. Instead of trying to find our place in the existing galactic order, we build our own. Instead of asking for permission to exist, we take what we need to survive. Instead of hoping the council will protect us, we make it clear that attacking humans comes with consequences. That sounds like a recipe for war. Sarah, we're already at war. The only question is whether we're going to fight back or let ourselves be hunted to extinction one colony at a time. She thought of Emma, the little girl who had hidden in a waste recycler for 3 days. She thought of her daughter Jessica, barely 19 and dead defending people she'd never met. She thought of the 40,000 civilians who had died while the galaxy's greatest civilization debated natural order and universal law. What would this new doctrine look like in practice? Marcus activated his own datapad and showed her a series of ship schematics. Project Dragon's Tooth. We've been developing new weapon systems based on technologies the Council has declared off limits for developing species. Antimatter warheads, quantum disruption fields, gravity weapons. Those technologies are banned for good reason. They're planet killers. So are the Draconis, but nobody seems interested in banning them. Marcus's voice carried a bitter edge. Sarah, the galaxy doesn't play by the rules it forces on us. The major powers all have weapons that could sterilize worlds. They just don't use them because it would upset the balance of power. And we would? We would make it clear that attacking humans means accepting the possibility of total retaliation. Not just against military targets, but against the Draconis homeworlds themselves. Sarah stared at the ship designs. They were elegant in their deadliness. Vessels built not for exploration or trade, but for the single purpose of projecting overwhelming force. This isn't just about defending ourselves anymore, is it? This is about making the galaxy afraid of us. Yes, Marcus said simply, because fear is the only language they understand. The Council respects the Draconis because the Draconis are dangerous. They dismiss us because they think we're weak. It's time to correct that misconception. A soft chime indicated that Sarah's detention period was over. She was free to leave council space, free to return to Earth and file her report and watch as diplomats tried to smooth over the waves she had made. Or she could choose a different path. If I agree to meet with this Liberation Front, what happens to my career? My rank? Marcus smiled grimly. Sarah, after today, your career with the official military is over regardless. The government will never forgive you for embarrassing them in front of the council. But the Liberation Front, they're offering you something better than rank. They're offering you a chance to save our species. Sarah stood up slowly, her joints protesting after hours in the uncomfortable chair. Through the room's single window, she could see the vast structure of the council station, a monument to 1,000 different species working together in harmony. It was beautiful in its way, a testament to the possibility of cooperation and peace. It was also a lie. When do they want to meet? There's a ship waiting in Docking Bay 7. Captain Rodriguez will take you to a secure location where you can speak freely without council surveillance. Sarah walked to the window and pressed her palm against the cold glass. Somewhere out there, in the dark between the stars, the Draconis were planning their next hunt. Somewhere else, human families were going about their daily lives, unaware that they had been marked for death by creatures that killed for sport. My daughter died believing that humanity would fight back, she said quietly. That her sacrifice would mean something. It will, Marcus promised. But only if we're willing to become what the galaxy fears most. And what's that? Marcus joined her at the window, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. Monsters who fight back. The meeting took place in the cargo hold of a decommissioned freighter, drifting in the empty space between star systems. Sarah had been transported there in a ship with no official registry, piloted by people who introduced themselves only by first names. The vessel itself bore no markings that would identify its origin or purpose. 12 people waited for her in the converted cargo bay, seated around a holographic display table that cast blue light across their faces. Sarah recognized some of them from military briefings and news reports, but others were complete strangers. What they all shared was a look of grim determination that she had seen in her own mirror every morning since Kepler 442b. Admiral Chen Wei, no relation despite the shared surname, stood as Sarah entered. He was a small man with the quick, precise movements of someone who had spent his life making critical decisions under pressure. Commander Chen, thank you for coming. Admiral. Sarah took the empty chair they indicated. I understand you have a proposal for humanity's future. Straight to business. I like that. Admiral Chen activated the holographic display, and the space above the table filled with star charts showing human colonial space. Red markers indicated the 3 dead colonies, while yellow markers showed probable future targets. What we have is not a proposal, Commander. What we have is a plan. General Patricia Hayes, a woman Sarah recognized from the Joint Colonial Defense Command, leaned forward. The official response to the Draconis attacks has been evacuation recommendations and diplomatic protests. Our government wants to pull back to Earth and the inner colonies, hoping that if we make ourselves small enough, the predators will lose interest. That's not how predators work, said a man Sarah didn't recognize. He was younger than the others, with the bearing of intelligence services rather than line military. I'm Director Walsh, Strategic Intelligence. Our analysis shows that withdrawal will only encourage the Draconis to pursue us. They see retreat as weakness, and weakness makes prey more appealing. Admiral Chen gestured to the display which zoomed in on the frontier regions. The Terran Liberation Front has been developing contingency plans for this situation for the past 18 months. We call it Operation Draco's Bane. The display shifted to show fleet movements and supply lines. Sarah studied the patterns with a growing sense of unease. This looks like a full military mobilization. Because that's exactly what it is, General Hayes confirmed. Commander, the age of hoping for galactic acceptance is over. The Council has made it clear that they view us as expendable. The Draconis have made it clear that they view us as prey. It's time for humanity to make our own position clear. Director Walsh activated a new section of the display. Phase 1 involves the recall of all human ships from Council space, and the termination of our participation in galactic trade agreements. We've been supplying raw materials and agricultural products to species that see us as inferior. That ends immediately. Phase 2, continued Admiral Chen, is the deployment of our new military assets, Project Dragons. Tooth has produced a fleet of vessels specifically designed for asymmetric warfare against technologically superior opponents. Sarah watched as the display showed ship designs unlike anything in the current human fleet. They were smaller than traditional warships but heavily armed, with stealth capabilities that would allow them to strike without warning. These look like raiders, not defensive vessels. They are raiders, General Hayes said without apology. The Draconis understand only one form of communication. We're going to speak their language. What exactly does that mean? Director Walsh pulled up intelligence files showing Draconis fleet positions and supply routes. It means that every Draconis vessel that enters human space will be destroyed. Not disabled, not captured. Destroyed. And their wreckage will be left as a message to others who might consider following their example. But it doesn't stop there, Admiral Chen added. The Draconis Empire relies on tribute from their subject species and resources stolen from raids. We're going to target their supply lines, their tribute fleets, their raiding bases. We're going to make the cost of their predatory lifestyle higher than they're willing to pay. Sarah felt a chill as she began to understand the scope of what they were proposing. You're talking about a guerrilla war against the most dangerous military force in the galaxy. We're talking about survival, corrected a woman Sarah recognized as Dr. Elizabeth Kane, formerly of the Xenobiology Research Division. Commander, I've spent the last 5 years studying Draconis psychology and social structure. They're not just predators, they're sadistic predators. They could have wiped out our colonies instantly with orbital bombardment, but they chose ground assault because they wanted to maximize suffering. Dr. Kane activated a series of video feeds from the attack on Kepler 442b. Sarah had seen the footage before, but watching it again in this context made her stomach clench with renewed anger. They spent 6 hours in the settlement before they began killing civilians. 6 hours playing with their food, and when they were done, they didn't even take anything valuable. They killed for entertainment and left the resources to rot. The other galactic powers know this, Director Walsh added. They know exactly what the Draconis are, and they've decided that appeasing them is easier than fighting them. The Council's balance depends on having someone to feed to the monsters. General Hayes stood and walked to the edge of the display. But there's something the Council doesn't understand about humans. Something the Draconis haven't learned yet. We don't accept being food. The plan has 3 phases, Admiral Chen continued. Withdrawal and mobilization, asymmetric warfare and demonstration. The 3rd phase is the most critical. Sarah didn't like the way he said demonstration. What kind of demonstration? The display shifted to show a detailed map of Draconis territory. At its heart was a single star system marked in pulsing red. Draconis Prime, the Draconis homeworld. Population approximately 2 billion. The cargo bay fell silent except for the hum of life support systems. Sarah stared at the display, understanding dawning like a cold sunrise. You want to attack their homeworld? We want to give them the same choice they've given humanity, Director Walsh said quietly. Submit or die. You're talking about genocide. No, Dr. Kane interjected firmly. Genocide is what the Draconis do. Random killing based on species hatred. What we're proposing is justice. Proportional response to aggression. Admiral Chen reactivated the star charts showing human space. 3 colonies. 40,000 civilians, men, women, children killed for sport. The Draconis leadership ordered those attacks knowing full well that humans posed no military threat to them. They chose to make war on our innocence. So we respond by making war on theirs. We respond by making it clear that actions have consequences, General Hayes said. The Draconis have operated under the assumption that they could hurt anyone they wanted without facing retaliation. We're going to prove them wrong. Sarah studied the faces around the table. These weren't madmen or warmongers. They were military professionals who had reached the conclusion that conventional responses to the Draconis threat would result in the eventual extinction of human civilization. What makes you think this will work? The Draconis have been the dominant military power in this region for centuries. Because they've never faced an opponent willing to match their ruthlessness, Director Walsh answered. Every species the Council has inducted has followed the same pattern. Diplomatic contact, integration into the galactic economy, acceptance of Council authority. The Draconis know how that story ends. They know how to fight civilized opponents. But we're not going to be civilized, Dr. Kane added. We're going to be exactly as savage as they are, with one important difference. We're going to be savage in defense of our people, not for entertainment. Admiral Chen stood and walked around the table to face Sarah directly. Commander, your speech to the Council has already changed the political landscape on Earth. Public opinion is shifting towards supporting military action. But we need more than public support. We need symbols. We need heroes. We need someone who can stand before humanity and explain why we're choosing to become something we never wanted to be. You want me to be a recruiter for a war that could end with the destruction of our species. I want you to be a voice for justice in a galaxy that has forgotten what the word means, Admiral Chen replied. Your daughter died defending innocent people from monsters. Her sacrifice should inspire others to make the same choice. Sarah closed her eyes and saw Jessica's face, so young and determined. She had died believing that her sacrifice would matter, that humanity would not simply accept defeat and extinction. If we do this, if we become what you're proposing, how are we different from the Draconis themselves? Because we're not killing for fun, General Hayes said simply. We're killing to survive. And when the threat is over, we'll stop. Will we? Sarah challenged. Once we've built a military machine capable of destroying entire star systems, once we've proven that we're willing to use it, what stops us from becoming the next galactic predator? The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Finally, Admiral Chen spoke. Because unlike every other species in this galaxy, we'll remember what it was like to be the prey. The death of Prince Vashatar sent shockwaves through the galaxy that Sarah could never have anticipated. Within days of the battle, she found herself receiving communications from species she had never heard of. Oppressed populations across Draconis space who suddenly saw hope where there had been only despair. The Carillion mining worlds were the first to rebel. For 2 centuries they had labored under Draconis occupation. Their people worked to death extracting rare metals for the Empire's war machine. When news of the prince's defeat reached their underground resistance networks, they rose up with a fury that surprised even Sarah. 17 mining facilities seized, reported Commander Jackson as he briefed the senior staff aboard the rebuilt Retribution. The Carillions are requesting human military advisors and weapons shipments. Sarah studied the star charts that now showed rebel activity spreading across dozens of systems. What had begun as humanity's fight for survival was becoming something much larger and more dangerous. What about the Xanthari artists' colonies? Full revolt, Captain Torres confirmed. They've declared independence from the Empire and established a provisional government. The Draconis garrison forces were overwhelmed before they could call for reinforcements. Dr. Kane activated additional displays showing the scope of the uprising. Ma'am, we're looking at the largest internal rebellion in Draconis history. 12 species, 43 star systems, and the numbers are growing daily. Sarah felt a mixture of pride and concern. The success of human tactics had inspired others to fight for their freedom, but it had also transformed their conflict from a limited war to a galaxy-spanning revolution. What's the Council's response? Panic, Director Walsh replied bluntly. He had arrived from Earth the previous day with updated intelligence from the home system. 3 Council member species have reported their own internal unrest. The hive worlds are seeing worker strikes, and the Aquatic Alliance is dealing with separatist movements. The Council is terrified that the rebellion will spread to their own territories. Good, Sarah said with satisfaction. Let them be afraid for once. Ma'am, Dr. Kane interjected, there's something else to consider. Our intelligence suggests that the Draconis Empire is preparing a massive retaliation. Not just against us, but against all the rebel worlds. They're mobilizing their entire fleet. Sarah studied the tactical projections. If the Empire committed their full military strength to crushing the rebellion, the loss of life would be catastrophic. Entire species could be wiped out in retaliation for daring to resist their oppressors. How long before they're ready to move? 6 weeks, maybe 8, Commander Jackson estimated. They're recalling ships from across their territory and concentrating them at their main naval base. Sarah stood and walked to the observation windows, looking out at the human fleet that now numbered over 100 vessels. The Terran Liberation Front had grown beyond anything she had imagined possible, but even their expanded force was tiny compared to the military might the Draconis Empire could bring to bear. Ma'am, Captain Torres said quietly, Earth Command has been in communication with the rebel species. They're asking for more than advisors and weapons. They want a formal alliance. Against the Draconis Empire? Against anyone who tries to maintain the old order through force, Director Walsh clarified. The rebel species are proposing a new galactic confederation based on the principles humanity has demonstrated. Self-determination, mutual defense, and justice for war crimes. Sarah turned back to her staff. What's Earth's position? Officially, Earth is still trying to maintain diplomatic relations with the Council while supporting our operations. Unofficially, Director Walsh smiled grimly. The President asked me to convey a message. He said to tell you that humanity didn't come this far just to watch our allies be slaughtered. The implications were staggering. Earth was effectively choosing sides in what could become a galactic civil war. What about resources? We're already stretched thin supporting our own operations. The rebel worlds have been surprisingly well organized, Dr. Kane reported. The Carillions are offering refined metals. The Xanthari have manufacturing capabilities, and the agricultural worlds can provide food supplies. What they need from us is military leadership and the tactical innovations that have made our campaign successful. Sarah considered the offer. Accepting would mean taking responsibility for the survival of dozens of species and billions of lives. Refusing would mean abandoning potential allies to face Draconis retaliation alone. "Ma'am," Commander Jackson said, "there's one more thing. We've intercepted communications between the Draconis High Command and Emperor Chardon himself. They're not just planning to crush the rebellion. They're planning to make an example that will prevent future uprisings." "What kind of example?" Dr. Kane's face was grim as she activated a new display. "Complete orbital bombardment of rebel worlds. Not just military targets, but population centers. They want to kill enough civilians to terrify any other species that might consider resistance." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah thought of the little girl, Emma, hiding in a waste recycler while monsters hunted her family. She thought of her daughter, Jessica, dying to protect people she had never met. She thought of 40,000 human civilians who had been killed for sport. How many people are we talking about? Conservative estimates? 50 billion civilians across the rebel worlds, Director Walsh replied quietly. 50 billion. The number was almost too large to comprehend. It represented entire civilizations that would be wiped out simply for daring to resist their oppressors. Sarah had started this war to save humanity, but now she found herself in a position to save or damn dozens of other species. "Ma'am," Captain Torres said, "what are your orders?" Sarah looked around the briefing room at the faces of people who had followed her into an impossible war and somehow managed to win every battle. They were waiting for her decision, trusting her judgment in a situation that would determine the future of the galaxy. She thought about the message her daughter had written in blood on a ruined wall. "We are coming." 3 words that had become a promise to the dead and a threat to their killers. But now those words meant something more. They were a covenant with every innocent life that depended on humanity's willingness to fight for justice. "Send a message to Earth Command," she said finally. "Tell them that the Terran Liberation Front accepts the alliance with the rebel worlds. We'll provide military leadership and tactical support for their defense." "Ma'am," Director Walsh warned, "this means war with the entire Draconis Empire, not raids or limited engagements, but total war. They'll throw everything they have at us." Sarah smiled, and there was something in that expression that would have given the Emperor himself pause. Let them come. It's time they learned what humans are really capable of when we're fighting for something bigger than ourselves. She moved to the communications console and opened a channel to the rebel fleet that had been gathering in nearby systems. Representatives from a dozen species appeared on the display, their faces showing a mixture of hope and desperation. "This is Commander Chen of the Terran Liberation Front," she began. "I'm here to tell you that you are no longer alone in your fight for freedom. Humanity stands with you, not as conquerors or liberators, but as allies in a common cause." She paused, thinking of all the species that had suffered under Draconis oppression, all the civilizations that had been reduced to tribute and slavery. The Empire believes that fear is stronger than hope, that oppression is more powerful than justice. They believe that anyone who challenges their authority can be crushed through sufficient application of force. Today we prove them wrong. Sarah looked directly into the camera, knowing that her words would be transmitted across rebel space and eventually reach the Draconis High Command itself. "To Emperor Chardon and his followers, we send this message. Your age of easy prey is over. Your empire of fear ends now. You wanted to teach the galaxy about consequences. We accept that lesson, but we'll be the ones doing the teaching." She closed the channel and turned to her staff. "How long before we can coordinate a unified defense of the rebel worlds?" "With proper preparation, 2 weeks, Captain Torres estimated." "Make it 1 week, Sarah ordered. The Draconis think they're fighting a collection of scattered rebels. They're about to discover they're facing something they've never encountered before." "What's that, ma'am?" asked Commander Jackson. Sarah's smile widened. "United species that remember what it's like to be prey, led by humans who've learned to be predators." 6 months after the meeting in deep space, Sarah stood on the observation deck of the TLF Retribution, watching as the first phase of Operation Draco's Bane reached its climax. Through the reinforced transparency, she could see the Draconis supply convoy spread out like glittering jewels against the black of space. 12 heavy transport vessels accompanied by 4 escort cruisers, carrying tribute stolen from a dozen different species. It was about to become a graveyard. "All strike teams report ready," came the voice of Captain Torres through the comm system. Sarah had watched the woman transform from a promising frigate commander to one of humanity's most feared raiders in the span of half a year. The war had changed all of them. Sarah activated her own communicator. "Begin the attack." The human fleet struck like wolves falling on sheep. The Dragon's Tooth vessels materialized out of stealth at point-blank range, their quantum disruption weapons tearing through Draconis shields as if they were paper. The escort cruisers managed to return fire for perhaps 30 seconds before they were reduced to expanding clouds of superheated metal. The transport ships never had a chance. Sarah watched the destruction with a mixture of satisfaction and revulsion. Each transport held not just stolen goods, but also the crews responsible for collecting them. Draconis traders who had built their wealth on the suffering of others. She told herself they deserved their fate, but the ease with which her feelings had hardened still disturbed her. Target vessels destroyed, Captain Torres reported. No survivors detected. Debris field shows they were carrying Xanthari art treasures and Carillion rare metals. Estimated value? She paused. 43 billion council credits. Sarah nodded grimly. The number was important not for its economic value but for its psychological impact. The Draconis Empire operated on fear and the perception of invincibility. Every successful raid, every destroyed convoy, every message left written in the wreckage of their ships eroded that foundation. "Deploy the marker beacon and prepare to withdraw," Sarah ordered. The beacon would broadcast a simple message in the Draconis language. Payment for Kepler 442b. More to follow. As the human fleet prepared to jump back to hyperspace, Sarah's personal communicator chimed with an encrypted transmission from Earth. The message was brief but significant. Phase 2 approved. Begin targeting military assets. For 6 months, the Terran Liberation Front had restricted their attacks to Draconis supply lines and civilian targets, reasoning that the same logic the Empire used to justify their raids. But military targets were different. Military targets meant the Draconis would be forced to respond with their own military forces, escalating the conflict to open warfare. Sarah walked through the corridors of the Retribution, noting how the crew carried themselves with a confidence that had been impossible during the early days of the war. They had learned to fight like the Draconis, striking without warning and disappearing before retaliation could be organized. More importantly, they had learned to win. The transformation hadn't been limited to tactics. The ship itself bore little resemblance to the clean, bright vessels of the old human fleet. The corridors were painted in dark colors that absorbed light, and the crew wore black uniforms without rank insignia or unit markings. They had become ghosts, existing in the spaces between the galaxy's official maps. In the ship's briefing room, Sarah found her senior staff reviewing intelligence reports from across Draconis space. The news was encouraging. 3 major tribute convoys destroyed in the past month, along with 2 raiding fleets that had been caught returning from attacks on non-human colonies. The economic damage was beginning to force changes in Draconis behavior. Commander Jackson, her intelligence officer, looked up from his datapad. "Ma'am, we're receiving reports that the Draconis have begun organizing their convoys differently. Larger escort forces, more heavily armed transports, randomized shipping schedules." "Good," Sarah replied. "That means we're hurting them. It also means they're adapting. Our next raids will be more dangerous." Sarah took her seat at the head of the briefing table. "Then we adapt too. That's what humans do best." Dr. Kane, who had left her research position to join the war effort as a strategic advisor, activated the holographic display. "We've identified a significant opportunity. Intelligence suggests that Prince Vashitar himself will be commanding the next major tribute fleet. If we could capture or kill him, the psychological impact would be enormous," finished Captain Torres. "He's the heir to the Draconis throne and their most successful military commander. His loss would shake their entire power structure." Sarah studied the tactical assessment. The target convoy would be massive, heavily defended, and led by someone who had never lost a battle in 3 decades of warfare. It was exactly the kind of target the old human military would have avoided as too dangerous. But they weren't the old human military anymore. "What's our window?" Sarah asked. "The convoy will pass through the Kepler belt in 18 days, Commander Jackson replied. "It's a relatively isolated system with multiple asteroid fields that could provide cover for our approach." Dr. Kane pulled up the psychological profiles. "Prince Vashitar is known for his arrogance and his belief in Draconis superiority. He's likely to accept the challenge of fighting us directly, rather than calling for reinforcements. And if he doesn't, then we withdraw and look for another opportunity. But ma'am, I don't think he will. Everything we know about Draconis culture suggests that being seen as afraid of humans would damage his standing more than losing a battle. Sarah considered the implications. Successfully eliminating Prince Vashatar would be a strategic victory beyond measure, but failure would likely result in the destruction of her entire fleet. The Terran Liberation Front had grown to encompass nearly 40 ships, but they were still vastly outnumbered by the Draconis military. Ma'am, Captain Torres said quietly, there's something else to consider. Earth Command has been receiving diplomatic pressure from the Council to end our operations. Some of the member species are concerned that our success might inspire their own oppressed populations to rebel. Sarah laughed bitterly. So the Council is more worried about the stability of their system than they are about justice for our dead. According to the latest reports, High Counselor Vexai has formally requested that Earth recall all military vessels and submit to Council mediation of the dispute with the Draconis Empire. And Earth's response? Officially, Earth is considering the request. Unofficially, Commander Jackson smiled grimly. Recruiting for the TLF has increased by 400% since news of our victories reached the home system. We're getting volunteers from the regular military, merchant marine, even civilian spacecraft crews. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with concern. The war was popular on Earth, but popularity could be a dangerous thing. It might encourage recklessness or unrealistic expectations about what they could accomplish. What about casualties? She asked. The question sobered the room. Dr. Kane consulted her records. We've lost 3 ships and 67 personnel since operations began. Draconis losses are estimated at over 10,000 killed, and equipment losses worth more than 500 billion credits. The numbers were encouraging from a strategic perspective, but Sarah couldn't help thinking about the 67 families who had received death notifications. Each loss was a person who had believed in their cause enough to die for it. Ma'am, Captain Torres said, interrupting her thoughts. What are your orders regarding Prince Vashatar? Sarah looked around the table at the faces of people who had chosen to follow her into a war that could destroy their species or reshape the galaxy. They were waiting for her decision, trusting her judgment in a situation where the wrong choice could mean extinction. She thought about her daughter Jessica, who had died buying time for civilians to escape. She thought about the little girl Emma, who had hidden in a waste recycler while monsters hunted her family for sport. She thought about the 40,000 dead on 3 human colonies, and the billions more who would die if humanity failed to establish itself as something more dangerous than prey. We're going after him, she said finally, but we do it smart. Full tactical analysis, multiple contingency plans, and absolute operational security. This isn't just about winning a battle. This is about sending a message to the entire galaxy that humanity is no longer anyone's victim. Commander Jackson nodded and began making notes. What message do you want to send, ma'am? Sarah smiled, and there was something in that expression that would have made the Draconis themselves pause. The same message my daughter left on that wall. The same message I delivered to the Council. She stood up, her reflection ghost-like in the briefing room's darkened windows. The battle for Prince Vashatar's convoy began not with weapons fire but with silence. For 3 days the human fleet had waited in the shadow of a massive asteroid, their ships powered down to minimal signatures while they watched the Draconis formation approach. Sarah had used the time to study her enemy through long-range sensors, learning the patterns of their movement and the rhythm of their communications. The Prince's flagship was a thing of terrible beauty, a kilometer-long predator built for both intimidation and destruction. Its hull was covered in the trophies of 100 victories, the preserved remains of enemy vessels welded to its armor like scalps. Sarah counted the wreckage of at least a dozen human ships among the grisly decorations. Contact in 30 minutes, whispered Commander Jackson from the sensor station. The entire bridge operated in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might alert their quarry to the trap that had been so carefully laid. Sarah studied the tactical display one final time. The Draconis convoy consisted of the Prince's flagship, 6 heavy cruisers, and 20 transport vessels carrying tribute from the outer systems. Intelligence suggested there were nearly 50,000 beings aboard those ships, most of them slaves taken during raids on defenseless colonies. The moral complexity of the situation wasn't lost on her. Destroying the convoy would mean killing the innocent along with the guilty. But allowing it to pass would mean condemning countless others to the same fate in future raids. War, she had learned, was a mathematics of suffering where every choice led to tragedy. "All ships report ready," Captain Torres announced from her position at the communications console. Around them, 38 human vessels waited like hunters in the dark. They were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had advantages their enemy couldn't match: desperation, fury, and most importantly, nothing left to lose. "Begin the attack," Sarah ordered. The asteroid field erupted with light as the human fleet emerged from hiding, their weapons already charged and targeting solutions locked. The first salvo caught the Draconis escorts completely unprepared, overwhelming their shields and tearing through armor with concentrated quantum fire. But Prince Vashitar had not survived 3 decades of warfare by being easily surprised. Even as his escort ships died around him, he was issuing orders and organizing a counterattack that demonstrated why the Draconis Empire had dominated this region of space for so long. "Flagship is launching fighters," reported the tactical officer. "Multiple squadrons moving to engage our lighter vessels." Sarah watched the display as streams of enemy interceptors poured from the prince's ship like angry insects. Each fighter was crewed by a Draconis warrior trained from birth for combat, and their ships were armed with weapons that could cripple human vessels with single hits. "Deploy countermeasures and order all frigates to defensive formation," she commanded. "Focus fire on the heavy cruisers. We need to eliminate their long-range capability before they can coordinate a response." The battle quickly devolved into the kind of chaotic melee that favored neither side's traditional tactics. Human ships darted between the larger Draconis vessels, using their superior speed and maneuverability to avoid the worst of the enemy fire while concentrating their attacks on critical systems. The Draconis responded with disciplined volleys that turned several human ships into expanding clouds of debris. "We're losing the Vengeance," Captain Torres reported, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Direct hit to their reactor core. No survivors." Sarah watched the ship that had served beside them for months disappear in a brief star of nuclear fire. 43 crew members gone in an instant. The cost of war was always paid in lives that could never be replaced. "Focus all fire on the flagship," she ordered. "Everything we have." The human fleet converged on Prince Vashitar's vessel like wolves bringing down a giant. Their combined firepower was impressive, but the Draconis flagship had been built to withstand the assault of entire fleets. Its shields absorbed hit after hit while its own weapons carved devastating paths through the attacking force. "Ma'am," Commander Jackson called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Draconis flagship. It's on an open channel. Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was deep and cultured, speaking accented standard with the confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "Human vessels, this is Prince Vashitar of the Draconis Empire. I congratulate you on your ambush. It shows a cunning that I had not expected from your species." Sarah moved to the communications station. "Prince, this is Commander Chen of the Terran Liberation Front. We have no interest in your congratulations." A sound that might have been laughter came through the speakers. "Ah, the famous Commander Chen, your reputation precedes you. The Council speaks of you as a terrorist and a murderer. I find myself curious about which description is more accurate." "I'm neither," Sarah replied. "I'm a soldier fighting for the survival of my species." How refreshingly honest. Most of the galaxy's warriors hide behind concepts like justice and moral authority. You simply admit that you killed to protect your own. I respect that. Sarah felt a chill as she recognized something familiar in the prince's tone. "Is there a point to this conversation?" "Indeed there is. I propose a duel. Single combat between my flagship and yours. Winner takes the convoy and the survivors. Loser dies with honor." The bridge fell silent. Sarah could feel her crew watching her, waiting for her response to what was either an honorable challenge or an elaborate trap. "Why would you risk everything on single combat?" "Because, Commander Chen, you have already demonstrated that humans can fight as a fleet. I am curious to see if you can fight as warriors. Also," the prince's voice took on a darker tone, "you have cost my empire considerable resources over the past months. I find myself personally invested in your destruction." Sarah considered the offer. Her fleet was taking heavy casualties, and the battle could go either way. But single combat would spare the lives of her remaining crews while still giving her a chance to eliminate one of the Draconis Empire's most dangerous leaders. "Agreed," she said finally. "All vessels withdraw to minimum engagement range. This ends between us." The battlefield slowly cleared as both fleets pulled back, leaving the two flagships alone in the center of the asteroid field. The Retribution was less than half the size of its opponent, but Sarah had faith in her ship and her crew. "Ma'am," Captain Torres said quietly, "their vessel mass is 4 times what we do and has triple our firepower." The odds have never been in our favor," Sarah interrupted. "That hasn't stopped us yet." Prince Vashatar's ship moved with surprising grace for something so massive, its weapons tracking the smaller human vessel as it maneuvered for position. When the firing began, it was like watching a dance between a tiger and a cobra, each participant bringing different strengths to the deadly performance. The Draconis flagship relied on overwhelming firepower, salvos that could have destroyed cities raining down on the human ship. But the Retribution was built for speed and evasion, slipping between the energy beams like water flowing around rocks. For 10 minutes they circled each other, trading fire and taking damage. The human ship's superior maneuverability allowed it to target specific systems on the larger vessel, while the Draconis ship's massive firepower gradually wore down the Retribution's defenses. "Forward shields down to 30%, reported the tactical officer. "Hull breaches on decks 7 and 12. Sarah studied the enemy vessel, looking for weaknesses in its design. The Draconis built their ships like fortresses, all armor and weapons with little thought for efficiency or elegant engineering. But that approach left them vulnerable to anyone clever enough to exploit the gaps in their thinking. "Target their trophy displays," she ordered suddenly. "Ma'am, those enemy ships welded to their hull. They're not just decorations, they're structural weaknesses. Concentrated fire on the attachment points." The Retribution's weapons focused on the grisly trophies that covered the enemy flagship's hull. The added mass and irregular surfaces that the Draconis saw as symbols of their power became liability as human fire severed the connections and sent chunks of debris spinning away into space. But more importantly, removing the trophies exposed the underlying hull structure, revealing the pattern of internal bulkheads and critical systems that the decorations had hidden. "There," Sarah said, pointing to a section where the removal of trophy ships had revealed a cluster of exhaust ports, emergency power couplings for their main reactor. "If we can hit them simultaneously." The Retribution's final attack was a thing of precision and timing, every weapon on the ship firing at the exact moment needed to overwhelm the flagship's defensive capabilities. The quantum torpedoes struck their target with surgical accuracy, and for a moment the enemy vessel seemed to pause in space. Then Prince Vashatar's flagship began to come apart from the inside. Sarah watched as secondary explosions walked along the massive hull, each detonation feeding the next until the entire vessel was wreathed in fire. Through the chaos, she could see escape pods launching from the dying ship, carrying survivors away from the destruction. "Should we target the pods?" asked the tactical officer. Sarah thought of her daughter, who had died buying time for innocent people to escape. "No, let them go. The Draconis flagship broke up." The final battle began not with the thunder of weapons, but with silence that stretched across 3 star systems. Emperor Shardun himself had come to crush the rebellion, bringing with him the largest military force assembled in galactic history. 2,000 Draconis warships formed a wall of death that blotted out the stars, their hulls decorated with the trophies of 1,000 conquered worlds. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching the enemy formation through tactical displays that showed the true scope of the force arrayed against them. The combined rebel fleet numbered barely 600 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels crewed by beings who had learned to fight only recently. It should have been a massacre. "All rebel fleets report ready," Captain Torres announced from her position at the communications station. Around them, the bridge crew worked with the quiet efficiency of people who had learned to function under impossible pressure. Sarah opened a channel to the combined fleet. Representatives from 17 different species appeared on her display, their faces showing the same mixture of determination and terror that she felt in her own heart. "This is the moment we've been preparing for," she said quietly. "In a few minutes, the largest military force in galactic history will attempt to destroy everything we've built. They believe that fear is stronger than hope, that oppression is more powerful than justice." She paused, thinking of her daughter Jessica and the message written in blood on a ruined wall. "Today we prove them wrong, not because we're stronger than they are, but because we're fighting for something they can never understand." We're fighting for the right to exist without fear, to raise our children without wondering if monsters will come in the night. Sarah looked at each face on the display, seeing species that had suffered under Draconis oppression for centuries, beings who had finally found the courage to stand up to their tormentors. Whatever happens today, remember this. You are no longer prey. You are no longer victims. You are warriors fighting for freedom, and that makes you more dangerous than any predator. She closed the channel and turned to her tactical officer. Begin the attack. The rebel fleet moved like a school of fish fleeing sharks, but appearances were deceiving. Every movement had been carefully planned. Every formation designed to maximize their advantages while minimizing their weaknesses. The humans had taught their allies well. The Draconis Empire had expected a conventional battle, fleets meeting in open space to trade volleys until one side achieved dominance. Instead, they found themselves facing an enemy that refused to fight by the accepted rules of warfare. Carillion mining ships, their holds filled with explosive charges, accelerated to ramming speed and disappeared into the heart of the enemy formation before detonating like improvised antimatter bombs. Zenthari art vessels, their hulls covered in holographic projectors, created false images that confused Draconis targeting systems and drew fire away from more valuable targets. Human ships darted through the chaos like wolves in a flock of sheep, their crews implementing tactics learned through months of guerrilla warfare. They struck fast, hit hard, and disappeared before the enemy could coordinate a response. But the Empire had numbers and firepower that couldn't be overcome through cleverness alone. For every Draconis ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. For every tactical victory the rebels achieved, the enemy's overwhelming superiority gradually asserted itself. We're losing the Zenthari 3rd Fleet, reported Commander Jackson. Direct hit to their command ship. The formation is breaking up. Sarah watched as graceful alien vessels were torn apart by Draconis weapons fire. Each explosion represented dozens of lives lost, beings who had chosen to fight rather than accept continued oppression. Order the Carillion heavy cruisers to reinforce that sector, she commanded, and signal the human reserve squadrons to begin their attack run. The battle raged for hours, a 3-dimensional maze of death that stretched across millions of cubic kilometers of space. Ships appeared and vanished in bursts of light, their destruction marked only by expanding clouds of debris that drifted between the stars like cosmic ash. Through it all, Emperor Shardun's flagship held position at the center of the Draconis formation, its massive bulk serving as both command center and symbol of imperial power. Sarah had been watching it since the battle began, waiting for the right moment to implement the final phase of their plan. "Ma'am," Captain Torres called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the Imperial flagship. It's on an open channel. Put it through." The voice that filled the bridge was ancient and cold, speaking with the authority of someone who had ruled an empire for over a century. "Human vessel, this is Emperor Shardun. I offer you one final chance to surrender. Call off your rebellion and I will grant you a quick death." Sarah moved to the communication station. "Your Majesty, this is Commander Chen. I'm afraid we must decline your generous offer." A sound like grinding stone came through the speakers, which Sarah realized was the Emperor's version of laughter. "You fight well for primitives, but this charade has gone on long enough. My fleet will crush your rebellion and I will personally oversee the execution of every rebel leader. You're assuming you'll survive the next 10 minutes, Sarah replied calmly. "Threats from a species that has been in space for barely 2 centuries? You amuse me, human." Sarah checked her tactical display. The pieces were finally in position. "Your Majesty, you've made one critical error in your assumptions about humanity. And what is that? You assume we're trying to win this battle?" The Emperor's confusion was audible in his response. "Explain." Sarah smiled as she activated a secure communication channel to ships scattered throughout the battlefield. "We're not trying to win this battle, Your Majesty. We're trying to win this war. And to do that, we needed you to bring your entire fleet to one location." She paused, savoring the moment of realization that she could almost hear in the Emperor's breathing. "Your fleet is currently surrounded by 17 different minefields, each one armed with antimatter charges sufficient to sterilize a planet. My people have been placing them for the past 6 hours while you were focused on our conventional forces." The tactical display lit up with thousands of red dots as the hidden mines revealed themselves. forming a sphere around the Draconis fleet that left no avenue of escape. Impossible, the Emperor snarled. My sensors would have detected such an extensive mining operation. Your sensors were busy tracking the holographic projections we've been using to mask our real activities, Sarah explained patiently. It's amazing what you can accomplish when your enemy is too arrogant to consider that they might be outmaneuvered by primitives. The Emperor's flagship began moving, trying to break through the mine barrier, but the antimatter charges were too densely packed to allow passage without triggering a chain reaction that would destroy everything within light minutes. You're bluffing, Chardon said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. Detonating those charges will destroy your own fleet as well. Some of it, Sarah agreed. But we'll survive in sufficient numbers to continue the fight. Your fleet, on the other hand, will be completely annihilated, along with the knowledge and experience of your senior commanders, the genetic legacy of your noble houses, and the industrial capacity of your most advanced shipyards. She leaned closer to the communicator. In one moment, Your Majesty, I can end the Draconis Empire as a galactic power. The only question is whether you want to take the honorable path or force me to make that choice for you. The channel was silent for long moments. Around them, the battle continued as conventional forces clashed in the space between the mine barriers, but everyone knew that the real decision was being made in the conversation between two ship commanders. What are your terms? The Emperor asked finally. Complete withdrawal from all occupied territories, reparations to every species your empire has enslaved or exploited, and personal accountability for war crimes committed by your forces. You ask me to dismantle everything my ancestors built. Your ancestors built an empire on suffering and death, Sarah replied. I'm asking you to choose between dismantling it voluntarily or watching it burn with everyone you've ever cared about. Another long silence. Then, I need assurances that my people will be treated with dignity during this transition. You'll be treated exactly as well as you treated others, Sarah said coldly. Which means that how you're remembered depends entirely on how you choose to end this. The Emperor's next words carried the weight of absolute defeat. Very well. I hereby order all Imperial forces to cease hostilities and prepare for withdrawal from occupied territories. Sarah felt no triumph in the moment, only exhaustion and relief that the killing could finally stop. Your Majesty, one more thing, yes? Your Empire's victims deserve to know that their suffering has been acknowledged. I want you to broadcast a message to the entire galaxy, admitting to the crimes your people have committed and accepting responsibility for the consequences. You want me to humiliate myself before species I have ruled for centuries. I want you to tell the truth for once in your life, Sarah corrected. The galaxy needs to understand that the age of might makes right is over, that there are consequences for choosing to be monstery,